everyone, this is Teresa from Base 10 Montessori, and today we're going to go over Chapter 19 from The Absorbent Mind by Maria Montessori. In Chapter 19 is called The Child's Contribution to Society, Normalization. Now, normalization is a very common Montessori term, and we use it all the time, and we don't always explain what it is. Normalization is the goal of our work with our students. We want to have a normalized classroom. We want to have normalized students. And this can be difficult for a teacher to understand or recognize if they've never seen it before. And if you've listened to my other videos, you know that my background is early childhood education. That's where I came from before Montessori. And my idea of what a normalized classroom would have looked like as an early childhood person is incredibly different than what a Montessori person would consider to be normal. And in fact, I think it's actually becoming very rare to see a normalized classroom, and I think there's a lot of different reasons for it. So it's really a big topic, a difficult topic, because there are a lot of things going on in Montessori that's keeping our students in our classrooms from becoming normalized. And if you're trained in the AMI Montessori approach, there are a lot of things that go into creating a normalized classroom. And that can be anywhere from understanding how to respond to a student, when to interact with a student, and how long of a work cycle there should be, and just making sure that there aren't a bunch of interruptions and distractions. All of those things will affect whether or not your classroom becomes normalized. And if you're a Montessori teacher and you're not sure if you've ever experienced a normalized classroom, chances are you haven't. And this is also what's difficult. If you've never had a chance to teach with somebody who's been able to show you a normalized classroom, if you've never been able to observe a normalized classroom, then you really don't understand what it is that we are looking for in our classroom environment. In this chapter, chapter 19, is going to help us start to understand what goes into that normalization process. Let's start on page 181. And in this introduction to the chapter, we're going to talk about good character, bad character, and hard work. And she starts out by saying children's defects of character are not always regarded as bad by public opinion. Some are even valued. Passive children are thought to be good. Noisy and exuberant children with vivid imaginations are thought to be especially brilliant or even superior. Yet I saw in my first school, and in all those which have followed it, that these traits vanish as soon as the children become absorbed in a piece of work that attracts them. The so-called bad qualities, together with the good and the superior, all vanish, and there remains one kind of child. He has none of those qualities. So when we're thinking about normalization and we're thinking about what we want to see, we have to really challenge ourselves with what we're seeing in our students. Are we seeing success with a student because they're easy to deal with? Is that really what we label as success? Or do we like the students that create a little bit of trouble for us? Each teacher has a different preference for which students they want in their classroom. Some want really, really quiet children that are very passive. Some like the louder children that are a little bit harder to contain. But Maria Montessori right here is not talking about any of those qualities. When it comes to our students, what we're looking for is hard work that really the child is completely absorbed in. All there is the focus on their work, and everything else disappears. And when you see a child working like that, you will know. It will strike you just how absorbed they are, because no matter what is happening around them, that child that can focus, that can concentrate, that's absorbed in their work, you're not going to be able to distract them. They're going to keep working, and it's going to be such an incredible thing to witness. You will recognize it, and you will remember that moment. On pages 181 to 182, she starts talking about freedom and discipline. And if you haven't been through AMI Montessori training, this is a huge topic as well. Freedom, discipline, and movement are all topics that fit together. You can't have one without the other. And so when we're talking about discipline, when we're talking about achieving freedom in the environment, all of that is connected with movement. And she says here, the children in our schools have proved to us that their real wish is to be always at work. a thing never before suspected, just as no one had ever before noticed the child's power of choosing his work spontaneously. Then another thing happened, never before seen in a group of children. It was the arrival of discipline, which sprang up spontaneously. Discipline and freedom seemed to solve a problem. The answer lay in obtaining discipline by giving freedom. When children are placed in surroundings which permit them to evolve in orderly activity, they come to have this new aspect. And this is something that can really be taken in different ways in the Montessori environment. And you can see a lot of teachers don't understand this idea of freedom and discipline because it usually goes to one extreme or the other. Either they give them way too much freedom or way too much discipline. And really what we're talking about here is this beautiful cycle of having a prepared environment that allows the child to work, but through the work, they obtain this discipline. When they absorb the work, when they concentrate, when they focus, when they repeat this work, there is this discipline that evolves. And so the freedom that comes from the discipline and the freedom that creates the discipline are these very, very fine-tuned things. And it's really easy to get it wrong. And she will go on to explain this more throughout the chapter. On page 182, she talks about concentration, and she talks about how concentration leads to unity through active experiences. And now we're getting into that idea of active experiences. So remember, movement is a part of freedom and discipline in the Montessori environment. She says this change, which creates almost a uniformity of type, does not occur gradually, but appears all of a sudden. In any given child, it follows invariably upon a spell of deep concentration on some activity. No sooner has he found his work than his defects disappear. It does not help to reason with the children. Something within them seems to break out and fasten itself to the external activity. This attracts the child's energy, which thus becomes held in a constant piece of work activity repeated. The human being is a united whole, but this unity has to be built up and formed by active experiences in the real world. This is what is happening during the period from 3 to 6 when the hand is at work and the mind is guiding it. And so right here we're talking about that element of movement. And notice in here she also used the word repeated, which is also an important concept. We talk about how we need to have these active, real experiences, and we need to have that repetition. And in that repetition, we're going to have the self-perfection, right? If you don't repeat something, you're not going to perfect yourself. And the only way to have that repetition, the only way for you to get that self-perfection is to be absorbed in the work. That's not going to happen if you only do a work once and throw it away. It's not going to happen if you're not focused. And so she talks about how these active experiences need to engage the whole body. The hand is the instrument of the mind. The hand and the mind are connected, and that is unifying the whole body. And she's talked about in previous chapters how when a child is very clumsy and they're not uniform in their body, it's not coming together, that is something to look out for. And when you see a child completely engaged, completely concentrating, that clumsiness often disappears. But she said it's not going to happen unless we build it up. We have to build up the body. We have to build up our experiences in order to unite the body together and in order to create discipline. And it is this discipline that allows the child to eventually have more freedom throughout their environment. That concentration that happens spontaneously is going to happen because they have the freedom to choose a work that interests them. And so it's just this cycle of freedom leading to discipline, leading to repetition, And that's going to lead to even more freedom in the environment. The more skills they acquire, the more abilities that they have, the more their mind and their hand are connected, the more opportunities they will get to have. On pages 182 to 183, she talks about disunity and defects. She said the hand moves aimlessly, the mind wanders about far from reality. Language takes pleasure in itself, the body moves clumsily, and these separate energies, finding nothing to satisfy them, give rise to numberless combinations of defective and deviated growth, which become sources of conflict and despair. Such deviations cannot be attributed to personality itself. They come from a failure to organize the personality. So now we're talking about what we don't want to see, what isn't normal in the classroom. And this is where you're going to see something like early childhood differ from Montessori. Because while there can be a lot of freedom in free play, in dramatic play, and in the different things you see in an early childhood environment, a lot of it is aimless. The hand moves aimlessly, the mind wanders. There's no discipline in work that they do in childcare because there is no cycle of I wait my turn, I take the work off the shelf, I have watched a presentation of how to do this work, I've completed the work, and I put it back onto the shelf. And so there's this whole process that goes into a Montessori lesson that doesn't take place in early childhood. So there's this whole process that takes place in Montessori, which requires a child to, first of all, pay attention to the presentation that the guide is giving. There is the discipline in movement, because we are very particular in our movements in a lesson in Montessori. And there's also this idea of completing a cycle of work. This discipline of I care for the environment, I take care of things, my mind and my hand are connected well enough to do everything the way it was shown, and then I place it back onto the shelf for the rest of the community to enjoy. And so what we're seeing in other environments is that we don't have this cycle of work. We don't have this cycle of concentration where another child isn't allowed to interrupt them. And that is a big difference between what's going on in Montessori and what's going on in early childhood, is that we protect concentration, we protect the work cycle, we protect other children from taking away or interrupting another child. Because when that concentration starts going, when that purpose for the child is there to do something and they're fulfilling a need, that is what causes normalization. And in other environments, when that gets interrupted, that is what's causing deviations. And so because we interrupt children so much, and because we allow other children to interrupt other children and to take away their toys or to take away their work when they're halfway through, the concentration, the purpose, the goal of what they're working with never gets achieved, and we don't have discipline. We don't get concentration, and we don't end up with normalization. On page 183, she talks about normalization specifically. She says the transition from one state to the other always follows a piece of work done by the hands with real things. Work accompanied by mental concentration. The psychological event which brings to mind the cure of adults by psychoanalysis, we have called by the technical term normalization. So let's go back to that first thought. In order to achieve normalization, she says, we have to have a work done by the hands with real things. Now, think for a second how many fake things we give young children to play with. Fake food, fake garden tools, fake house cleaning tools. And it's not that you can't have concentration with that work, but it's not as purposeful. Right? This is fantasy. We're offering them the fantasy of cleaning the house, the fantasy of preparing food. But what she's saying here is when you have real work done with the hands, with real things, real food, real housekeeping tools, real garden tools, you are more likely to see a child that is fully engaged. They are creating and acquiring skills at a faster pace, at a stronger pace. And not only that, you're going to see more mental concentration. The experiences have to be real, they have to have real consequences. And one of the benefits of doing that is the mental concentration will be stronger. It'll be more purposeful. And when a child experiences the purpose in a real work, it is far more satisfying than a fantastical work. And we're going to transition from a state of wandering around aimlessly to purposeful work. And in that purpose, they're going to repeat the activity until they have repeated it so much that they have perfected a skill and they're ready to build on that skill. So for instance, if we're pouring one-to-one, just a pitcher of water back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, that eventually becomes perfected. We don't stay there in that state. We offer the next challenge of, okay, let's see what we can do with this pouring skill. We can wash dishes with this skill, right? We can do laundry with this skill. We can do land and water formations. We can do a whole bunch of things with the skill of pouring water. We don't just stay with the one-to-one pouring. We put it to work. And notice that that opens up more opportunities. That creates more freedom for the child. And yet their body is becoming more disciplined. Their mind is becoming more disciplined through this experience. So they're gaining discipline and they're gaining freedom. Let's talk a little bit more about freedom on page 185. She says freedom is understood in a very elementary fashion, as an immediate release from the oppressive bonds, as a cessation of corrections and of submission to authority. This conception is plainly negative. That is to say, it means only the elimination of coercion. From this comes, often enough, a very simple reaction, a disorderly pouring out of impulses no longer controlled because they were previously controlled by the adult's will. To let the child do as he likes, when he has not yet developed any powers of control, is to betray the idea of freedom. And so let's break that idea down. And that last part is really the most important part. And this is where I see a lot of complaints about Montessori. This is where I hear a lot of complaints about Montessori because I have been told by many people that they don't want to put their children in Montessori because Montessori just lets them do whatever they want. No, that is not Montessori. Montessori is not about doing anything you want. You start out with a group of choices that you offer the child, and those choices are not random. We have prepared the environment. We have prepared lessons for the student, and they can choose any of the lessons that we prepare for them. And it is only when we see that they have acquired the skills they need in those lessons that we will give them another set of lessons that builds on their experiences. It's progressive. The lessons are progressive. They progress from simple to difficult, from simple to complex. And so when they enter the classroom, we would be doing a disservice to the children if we just say, hey, you know what? You haven't had a lesson on chopping carrots, but go ahead, just do whatever you want. We're not going to do that, right? We're not going to give them a knife and say, good luck. That's not how that works. We have to understand, first of all, that maybe they can butter a cracker properly before we give them a knife for chopping carrots. We're not going to give them a box of matches and say, have fun, go light some candles. No, they have to go through the entire environment pretty much before we would ever give a lesson on lighting a match. And so there are a bunch of things that they need to accomplish, that they need to build up the skills to do all of the lessons in the classroom. Not everything on the shelf is available for the student to touch. Not everything on the shelf is available for them to work with when they walk into that classroom. And this is really difficult. This can be a difficult concept, but you know what? Some of those lessons they spend 3 years waiting for. They spend 3 years watching for lessons like racks and tubes. They spend 3 years waiting, maybe to do a really complicated baking lesson. They will watch the older students doing this and they will say, I want to do that. And you will tell them, that is fantastic. Here are the lessons you need first. When I see you can do a lesson on cracking an egg, Then I'll know that you're ready to do a simple baking lesson. When you're ready to do chopping pickles very easily, we'll move on to other complicated recipes. So you tell them, hey, if you want to do racks and tubes, I need to see you working with the golden beads. I need to see you working with the stamp game. And so you let them know what you need to see from them. You need to say, these are the lessons that I need to give you before you can get there. And that is the motivation for doing some of the lessons that maybe they don't want to do. And if they come into the room not wanting to do anything, that's the difficult part, right? If you have a child that just can't be normalized, there is nothing that gets their attention. That's the tough part. And that's where we have to go throughout our classroom and keep trying until something on the shelf grabs their attention and they create this mental concentration that they become absorbed in a work. And there's always something. And it may be something as simple as scrubbing the floors, or it might be sewing. Most likely it's going to be a practical life work, but that's not always the case. But we need to find one lesson that allows them to experience the concentration. It all starts there with one work. Spontaneously, all of a sudden, they will be transformed. They'll experience concentration for the first time, and they will repeat that activity over and over. And that's when you know you have found the path to normalization. It's not about doing whatever they want. It's about very purposefully and specifically and progressively showing them the path to freedom. On page 185, she talks more about concentration, real experiences, and how that leads to discipline and freedom. She says real freedom instead is a consequence of development. Development is active. It is the construction of the personality, reached by effort and one's own experiences. It is the long road, which every child must travel to attain maturity. Anyone can dominate and repress the weak and subdued, but no one can cause another to develop. Development cannot be taught. If freedom is understood as letting the child do as they like, using or more likely misusing the things available, it is clear that only their deviations are free to develop. Their abnormalities will increase. And notice here that she talks about how no one can cause another to develop. She says that, anyone can dominate, anyone can repress the weak and subdued, right? And a lot of the times what we're doing is we are dominating young children. We're telling them no, we're telling them stop. We're telling them, this is what I want you to do, instead of giving them the opportunity to work freely. And that's why when we give them a little bit of freedom, sometimes they go crazy because they haven't experienced it before, right? They've never experienced the idea of being able to make their own choices before. And so this can be really overwhelming when you first step into a classroom. A new child in a new environment like this is going to have a hard time being able to adjust to this freedom. But it is not doing whatever they want. It's giving them choices. Because if we let them do whatever they like, she says here that they're only developing deviations. Their abnormalities will increase. And so we are very specific in what we want the children to experience. We're very specific in our lessons. We're very specific in our movements. We're very specific in the choices that we allow in our classrooms. And we understand that it is the work that develops the child, not us, not the adult, not me controlling their will, but that the experience we give them in the classroom will help them develop. All of the works must lead to development, to discipline. On page 185, she also talks about the significance of the control and coordination of movement. Again, if you're going through AMI training or you want to go through AMI training, you're going to write papers, you're going to write theory papers on this. You're going to talk a lot about freedom and discipline and the coordination of movement and how it's all working together. And she says normalization comes about through concentration on a piece of work. For this, we must provide motives for activity so well adapted to the child's interests that they provoke his deep attention. Their success is dependent on the use of objects for the purposes they are designed to serve, a thing which is also conducive to the child's mental order. If they are used with care and precision, this leads the child to the coordination of his movements. So, normalization comes about through concentration on a piece of work. And this piece of work, as we've said before, has to be real, it has to be active, and it has to provoke a deep attention. And it has to be purposeful, right? We can't misuse the materials in the room. And this is what's going to put the child's mind in order. These lessons are designed to order the mind and order the body, to coordinate the movements. And we do this with a lot of care and precision. I remember when I was going through training, I had a classmate who did not come back for the next summer. She decided not to come back. And one of the things she always said was, I'm just not graceful enough to be a Montessori teacher. Because we do spend a lot of time talking about how we move in the classroom, how we pick up something in the classroom, how we physically move items in a classroom, in how you move your body, how you treat things, how you treat the materials. The child's going to pick up on that and they're going to reflect that. And so it is very important to be aware of movement. And this is something that I really struggle with because I'm very clumsy. I don't have a lot of coordination. I was not a Montessori child growing up, and so I'm trying to make up for that as an adult. But it is really difficult for me to be graceful as well. It's very difficult sometimes for me to focus and slow down with my movements so that I can see my students doing the work beautifully. So it does really matter that we set an example for coordination of movement in the classroom, that we work on that within ourselves. And you will be amazed at how they will pick up on it, and they will mirror your coordination if you set that example. So on pages 185 to 186, she talks about how concentration is not occupation. She talks about busy work. And this is really what I was talking about earlier when I was explaining what you're seeing in an early childhood environment, a childcare environment versus a Montessori environment. Montessori says mental order and the coordination of movement guided by scientific standards are what prepare for concentration. And this, once it has occurred, frees the actions of the child and leads him to the cure of his defects. We say concentration and not just occupation, because if the children go indifferently from one thing to another, even if they use them all properly, this is not enough to remove their defects. The essential thing is for the task to arouse such an interest that it engages the child's whole personality. And I just want to emphasize here that part where she says if the children go indifferently from one thing to another, even if they're using things properly, that's not enough. And this is why when you go through AMI training, you will study different types of behaviors. You will study a behavior that is just busy. You will study a behavior that is disruptive. You will study a behavior that is normalized and engaged. And you'll understand when you should interrupt a child. You'll know the difference between interrupting a child who is just involved in busy work and a child who's actually concentrating. Because if a child is not actually concentrating, you can go over there and interrupt them. But if they are concentrating, you want to protect that at all cost. And you really need to start studying the difference between what busy work is and concentration and what that looks like in your students. A lot of the times we just want to give our students busy work. I see a lot of exhausted teachers fall into this. They just want the busy work and they are so tired they don't have enough energy left to present works that create concentration, discipline, freedom. And this is really what I see a lot in a lot of Montessori classrooms is that if the children are just busy, the teacher seems satisfied, but it's not enough to be busy. You have to be engaged. The students have to be engaged. They have to be concentrating and they have to be building progressively from lesson to lesson. I remember subbing in this one classroom where a child was forced to sit at a table with knob cylinders. The child was 4 years old, maybe going on 5. First of all, she was way too old to sit with just one cylinder block. And she was just sitting there staring into space, playing around with it because the teacher would not give her any other lessons. This was not a challenging work for her, but the child was very well behaved, right? She wasn't creating a problem. She wasn't disturbing anybody. But for 45 minutes, she was just sitting at a desk playing with cylinder blocks. Just one thing of cylinders. Just one block of knob cylinders, not 2, not 3. She wasn't doing any of the blindfolded activities because the teacher did not approve of it. And it was just really sad. Her classroom, that classroom, was well behaved. It was quiet. And if you were passing in the hallway and if you had never been in a Montessori classroom before, you would have peeked in and thought, oh, wow, what a beautiful classroom. It's so quiet. It's so well behaved. But if you're a trained Montessori teacher, you would have looked at that and said, wow, that is really sad. There is no concentration going on. There's no purposeful work going on. The children are not engaged. There should be a hum of work and not silence. And so I really want us to think carefully about the sounds in our classroom, the work in our classroom. Is it busy work? Are we proud of our silence when we should be concerned that it's too quiet? Are we way too loud and proud of the boisterous application of busy work, but there's no purposeful work going on? Is there no hum of concentration going on? Is it all loud and busy? And so I want you to really reflect on the personality of the classrooms that you're seeing. How many of them are normalized? How many of them are too quiet or too loud? How many of them have not enough work, and how many of them allow too much work? Because there is this beautiful middle area that we need to come to where all of that drops away and there's just a child that's engaged and working. And it's a beautiful thing. If you have not experienced it, it is a beautiful thing. And it's that moment where you get to sit back as the teacher and say, my students are now working as though I do not exist. All of them making good choices, all of them coordinated in their movement, all of them engaged, all of them concentrating. And when you feel that with 30 students at a time, especially in that 3 to 6 age group, it is probably one of the most incredible experiences you will ever have, especially teaching. That's probably the number one thing you will ever get to experience positively in a classroom. And those moments, I just can't wait for somebody to come in and observe, because my proudest moments as a teacher is when I sit back and the whole classroom runs itself. They can do all of the things in the classroom they need to get done. They're all engaged. They all have choices. They all have a purpose. And that is my absolute favorite moment to share with others when they come in to observe a classroom. On page 186, she talks about purposeful work and how it heals. She said, it is application to work. An interesting piece of work freely chosen, which has the virtue of inducing concentration rather than fatigue, adds to the child's energies and mental capacities, and leads him to self-mastery. Now, to help such development, it is not enough to provide objects chosen at random, but we have to organize a world of progressive interest. The result is an educational technique based on the psychology of infantile development. And one of my favorite things about thinking about this is we know that this is true because it's true for adults. It's not just true for children, right? We know how this feels as an adult. An interesting piece of work. Have you ever been bored at your job? Have you ever hated your job? Have you ever experienced the difference between working at a job that you're bored by, that you can't concentrate on, and a job that completely engages you? How does that feel? Does it fatigue you, or does it give you this sense of energy, right? What does it do to your mind when you have purposeful work? How do you feel afterwards mentally and physically? And not only that, how does the difference in those two experiences lead you to self-perfection in different areas, right? It motivates you to perfect yourself. And so we know if it's true for us as an adults, it's also true for our students. The difference is the work that they are doing. Their work is growing up. Their work is growing their body. Their work is connecting their mind to their body. We don't do this through force. As she said, you can't force a child to develop. We do this through offering progressive lessons. We really want to make sure that our classrooms are not about the will of the adult, but that it's about the development of the child. If we offer the right lessons, if we offer the right experiences, the child will do the work of developing, of growing up. But that environment, what we offer them, she said, it can't be random. It has to be scientific. We have to organize it. And we have to be very precise with it. So this last part right here, I think I'm going to post on my community page on YouTube. I'll post it on Locals because I really feel like it's important to really understand this process, this progression to freedom. And it starts out with those real experiences. It starts out with movement. And so active movement is important. The hand is the instrument of the mind. You have to connect the two. And practical life activities have points of interest. And those points of interest are what's going to interest the child and get them to repeat the activity. And these practical life activities, like working with food, like working around the house, working around the yard, they have familiarity and purpose. And that's why it's important to bring that into the classroom, because if you have a child that isn't normalized, that's going to be an area that's familiar to them. There are going to be things in the practical life area that help them to adapt to the environment. And not only that, you're going to have a lot of activity in the practical life environment. There's going to be a lot of coordination of movement. But the activity has to spark their interest. You can't expect every student to love sewing. You can't expect every student to love baking. You can't expect every student to love woodworking. You have to offer enough experiences that something will spark their attention. And when that happens, you're going to have concentration and repetition, right? It's not enough to do the activity once. You will not perfect yourself with one experience of a work. But if children are really experiencing concentration, the repetition comes naturally. You don't have to tell them to repeat a lesson when they are engaged in it, when they are concentrating. They will naturally repeat that lesson. And it is that repetition that results in perfection and leads to discipline. Discipline in character and discipline in movement and in the body. And this is why even in the academic world, we need to start bringing movement and hands-on experiences back. We need to put that in high schools. We need to put that in colleges. We need to do less sitting in our environments, less lecturing, and more getting our hands dirty. This is especially true of the 12 to 18-year-old age group. The 12 to 18-year-old age group, guess what? They mirror the 3 to 6-year-old age group when it comes to getting their hands on materials and doing things. In between that age, in between the 6 to 12-year-olds, they kind of get a little more clumsy, right? They're doing a lot more abstract stuff in their head. But when they get to be 12 to 18 years old again, come back to this idea that's in the 3 to 6-year-olds right here. It's going to mirror each other. Real experiences and movement, concentration and repetition. It's just as important for high schoolers as it is to 3 to 6-year-olds. And that's going to create discipline, and it's going to create willpower. The control and coordination of movement is achieved through real experiences. This develops the will of the child by offering progressive lessons that build skills and expand opportunities. And we know that's true when it comes to training our high schoolers. We know that's true in training children in college. Guess what? That's true in the 3 to 6 year old environment as well. And this is what leads to freedom. Once a child has both the ability and knowledge to do something, his choices expand and multiply. This leads to more freedom and less dependence on an adult. And that is our goal, right? That is our goal, to raise up children to be independent, to work hard, to have freedom, to have choices, to be coordinated in their movements, and to have their mind well organized. So that was chapter 19. That's all about normalization. And I absolutely love this topic. I love talking about um, just the nuances that happen in the Montessori environment that you don't see in other places. And when I want to judge something in the book by whether or not I think it's true or not, because I might not agree with Maria Montessori on everything she says, but when it comes to the development of concentration, the development of the will, the development of personality, and how that coordinates with movement and real experiences. And I think about my experiences in my life, not only my successes, but my failures and my flaws. I see a lot of truth in it, right? I see a lot of truth in purposeful work and how it heals people, and not just children, right? I know we're talking about 3 to 6 year olds, but purposeful work heals adults as well. Think about what it means for you and what it would look like in your child or in your student, and start making plans that reflect those goals. So anyways, I have talked enough for today. That's all I have for you today. I hope you've liked chapter 19. It's a short chapter, but somehow I made it super long for this video, so I apologize for that. But if you like what I'm doing here, don't forget to hit that like button. Like, comment, share, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.